All of this is much the same as on a Retina 3C type camera. Alright, and do that screw up tight. That's that bit out the way. I'll see if I can zoom you in and show you that damaged screw. See if it'll actually show. Yeah, you can see that the top of that screw is somewhat distorted. And that's because everything wasn't seated when someone tightened it up. And you can see from the reflections of the light that's quite disc-shaped. The edges are pulled right up. That could fail at any moment. That's just rubbish. So back to the camera. Zoom out so you can see something. That'll probably do. Next, well, we want to get the rewind catch in place and the sprocket shaft. So here I've got my camera up on the all-purpose block of wood. Here's the catch for the rewind button. There's its return spring and there's its shoulder screw. I'll take some molybdenum paste and run that round the tip of that screw, that lever. I'll thumb through the pivot point for good measure. Slide that into position. Find the spring from where it disappeared. Put that into there and fit the screw. Now the spring revolves around one of the shoulders, the lever revolves around another. You've got to get this through and into the body, and of course it needs to be able to remove freely. So make sure that nothing's trapped underneath the shoulders, that it's passing through them. Now that's not moving free, that's better. Yep, that's good. So I need to get the spring back over that lever, like that, so that lever is now spring loaded. Open the back of the camera. I'll just latch that mirror plate down out of the way so that it's not hitting the table when I'm working on this. Take our sprocket. It's got a slot on one end. The slot side goes up. We'll slide that into position. The sprocket shaft, applying some synthetic grease to the shaft near the top. Near the bottom, that's where it passes through the casting. Normally I'll put just a touch on the teeth at the top. And this needs to slide down here. Now sometimes it won't go because the gear here is too far across. It's just a matter of tolerances and clearances. If I loosen those screws up, I can pull this across enough to drop this down. Passes down through the sprocket and it's visible at the bottom. I'm supporting it with my finger from below. So if I pull this back, you can see it's popped through. If I rotate the sprocket slightly, it pops up even higher because now this gear is engaged at this point. I'm rotating it to line up the hole here in the sprocket shaft. And this screw drives the sprocket from the sprocket shaft and getting this little screw in place. Sometimes it goes smoothly and other times it appears to be cursed. If it doesn't go in smoothly or easily, sometimes revolving the shaft 180 degrees is the answer, because the hole on the other side may have a better lead in for it, a bit of a countersink. This one doesn't want to start. So we'll try doing exactly that. I'll revolve everything here 180 degrees. And see if that screw will go in. This doesn't seem to be picking up. Make sure I'm centered on that hole. Here we go. Just wasn't holding my mouth right. Right, so at the bottom here, we want the rewind button and its return spring. Here's our rewind button, there's its washer, there's its return spring. One day I'll get a camera where the zoom can keep up. I'll put some synthetic grease on the spring, put that over the button, put the washer in place, holding the shaft from the top with my finger, screw this into the base of the sprocket shaft. Check that the button will pass through the washer, that the washer is not trapped on the shoulder of the screw. In taking my special pliers, which I haven't got here, I'll use these instead. I'll just tighten that up. And just checking the way this moves, it all moves smoothly. And tighten up these two screws at the top here that I'd loosened off to get the shaft down. Check that releases and everything drops into place. Okay, so that's good. So far so good with that. I want to tension the film advance and put the temporary base plate on there. I've got a cut down base plate that I'm using. What we have to do here is find the parts. Is there's a spring that drops down in here, and that works the capping plate. Now that spring has to be held in place by something, and I've got a cut down base plate that I use to do that. You can get by putting the spring in place here, and if you've got some decent sort of sticky tape, just stick that over the top there to hold that spring in place. Right, I'm going to tension that film advance now. So I'll just swing the lock lever back out of the way. Hold back the release lever, rotate this one full turn from the rest position. So we already had a third of a turn on it. Make sure the spring's still in place and put my temporary base plate there. This base plate is from some casualty or other. The end's a bit knocked in so it doesn't sit dead flat. It's always useful to have bits and pieces from casualties that you can use to do jobs with. Okay, and put the film advance lever in place on there. That screw doesn't want to go in there, why not? Some of these screws were a bit tight coming out as I recall. That screw hole is probably slightly damaged. I don't think it had anything cross-threaded in there, but it's not moving smoothly. We'll try another screw in there. I can always run a tap through it if I absolutely have to. Yeah, it's not good. Oh, it will go. Okay, So we've got our film advance lever in place. You can check the action of that now. Press the release shaft, hold my finger on the lock button shaft, or the film lock lever shaft, and check the film advance action. That's nice and smooth and runs very well. And check that the take-up spool moves smoothly here, and then if I roll it backwards against the grip of the clutch, it'll roll back without undue friction. So that part's good. At the top of the camera now, yeah, we'll do some more stuff at the top of the camera. We can start with our chrome trim plate, and that's held in place with the strap lug at the rewind end of the camera. Two screws. Long screws, pan head screws, or rounded screws. I'm not even sure what they call those. Yeah, we want to get the rewind can go in now, I think. Get that done, and then that's out of the way. The Reflex S has a single piece rewind shaft, so you can't pull the rewind up halfway when you're rewinding the film, because it'll just disconnect from the film cassette. So we'll put this in place. That's held in with two screws. Countersunk head screws. And they're both in place, tighten those up. Got this post. This post is used to support the top cover. I'll put that in place. It doesn't really need to be much more than finger tight. That brings us to putting the cocking rack in place. Okay, so with this camera I noticed something. This is the plate that holds the cocking rack down in place. It provides the tension. Here's our cocking rack. Let's put that in here so you can see. That sits in there like that. This bracket sits in here like this. It's got a roller on it. This roller has got a very deep groove in it. It should just be nice and smooth. It should look like this one. That's got a wear mark on it. It's got no groove that you can feel. So how did it come to have a very deep groove? Well, I looked at that. I did mention that the cocking rack looked like it was a later one. I believe it's hardened steel. That roller is running on this edge, and that edge here is very, very sharp, and that has cut into the roller. It probably also created a lot of friction at that point too. So this edge, I'm going to have to run a file over that. Hopefully it's not so hard that a file won't touch it. I'll run a file over that just to break that edge off, just to round it off slightly, so that it isn't a sharp edge. The end of it here, you could just about cut yourself on that. That's so sharp, and that has just burrowed into that wheel. This is, I believe that these are hardened. The surface on them is not a polished surface. And I think that that edge there, that sharp edge, has just simply carved its way into that roller. So I'll have a go with a file and see if that moves that, and if it doesn't, I'll use some emery. No, that I was able to take the edge off that with a file without any problem, so that's fine. So you can come back to putting the cocking rack in place now. I'll take some synthetic grease, apply it to the underside of the rack, to the teeth at both ends, and pop this in position. Now only the first tooth engages at this point. We've got our strap plug here. First we put this bush in place. It's a hardened bush. It's not the same thing as those black washers from the front of the camera, so don't mix them up or it won't go well. The screw that goes through that bush has got a shoulder on it. It's a countersunk head screw with a shoulder on it. I'm not sure whether the bush is intended to revolve around that screw or not. I'll put a wipe of molybdenum paste on there. Can't hurt. And a long screw goes through here. Tighten those two up. And we'll fit this bracket with its little roller in place. Well, I'll just squeeze a bit of grease into that roller. This one hasn't come fresh from the ultrasonic cleaner. This one's come off a parts camera, so it's not entirely dry. And that's held in place with 2 screws. The choice of screws used to hold that bracket down seems to vary a bit from camera to camera. I've got a long screw here at this end and a shorter rounded head screw at this end. I'll tighten those 2 screws up and check the action of the film advance. Press the release, hold down the lock. That moves nicely. There's absolutely no feeling of roughness or anything there. Check those screws. So that's the film advance components back in the camera body. Just thinking what I should do next, whether to put the meter and cord back in place. Yes, probably. Here's the plan for the cable run for the drum. This is where it runs around the meter drum here, and this shows how it travels over the pulleys on the camera body. This goes down into the camera body at this point, and this here, slightly smaller drawing, you can see how it follows through the pulleys down here and round the drum at the base, the small cable drum at the base of the camera. So basically, if you follow this, we follow the cord here on their meter. It's running round the pulley. There's a little pulley here, by the way, a tiny little one. It runs round that pulley. It's following the lower pulley there. It follows the goes to the front pulley at this position, stays on the front all the way down. It's on the front pulley at this position, and on this drum it's going to the front, of course, and it rolls round here 3/4 of a turn. That dot there signifies the knot. That's where the knot's locked into the slot in this drum. The other side of the cord, we follow that round. It runs to the top position here. It runs to the rear position of these rollers. Down here on the rear roller again. It runs to the top of the drum in this place. And that runs round the drum about 2 turns. And the knot finishes up opposite. The knots end up on opposite sides of that drum there. I've got the cord length marked here. The manual tells us it's 18¼ inches, which is 464 millimeters for all practical purposes. I've got the German manual about 2 somewhere, no, the German 3S manual. That doesn't mention the length. It just assumes, presumably, if you need a new cord, that you buy a new cord and it comes pre-knotted at the right length. So that's our cord run, and we'll get this all sorted out. Once the meter's in place, of course, nothing here is going anywhere because this is all trapped underneath it. So I'll take the opportunity now to put a drop of lacquer on that screw, which will mean that that screw is unlikely to just start backing out of its own accord. The meter. There's 2 plastic pins on that meter on the base. It's not uncommon for either or both to be sheared off. They sit into a little pocket here in the top housing and here on that back plate. Before we put this in place, we need to put our shutter release and our film release buttons in place. So I'll take the shutter release button here, run some molybdenum paste on that. There are 2 springs, and we want the shorter spring in this case. There's a notch in the front of that arm. Run a little wipe up there with molybdenum paste, and that's where it runs against this arm here. The film release button has the longer of the 2 springs, so I'm just running some molybdenum paste up the centre of that for lubricant, and that sits on its post just like that. The meter, we'll hook that into place. There's a wee tab on the end of the meter here, hooks under this thing at the end. And getting that film release button to sit nicely is always a bit of a challenge. And the meter, just checking that that's seated and those plastic pins are seated in the body. It's not very convincing. Yeah, no, that seems to be fine. And so, running the cord. Okay. Well, there's the little pulley that I mentioned. Right, so the cord goes round here, the lower position on that pulley, around the drum, past that little pulley. It's going to be in the upper position there. There's our cord. Make sure that the cord running here is in the lower position, the cord running here is in the upper position. This isn't the original meter cord, this is a new one that I've made. Just checking that there's nothing crossing over each other here or anything, that it's all sitting nicely. It appears fine. Our lower cord there goes to the front roller. And the upper cord goes to the rear roller. I'll get those lying correctly, like that. So that's all that's required there for the moment. We haven't got the cord tied to the drum here, it's simply wrapped around it. I need to pull the cord down through the body here. I've got a piece of wire here. It was actually a wire tie for, you know, wrapping your sandwich bags and so forth up. So I can pass that up through that felt light trap, dust trap arrangement there and pull those cords back through. So now I've got my cord down through the front of the camera. Got to check that I've got those cords still running over the correct positions at the top. Just pulling those along a little bit. So the one coming round the lower part here, running round there, runs to the front, and the other one runs to the top position. That's good. I've got to run those cords parallel without crossing them up and get them round the rollers here, round the pulleys. Now that's not right, that one there should be on the bottom position. The other should be in the front roller. Like that. Okay, and I'm checking the run of my cord to make sure that it's parallel here through here and that the correct cord is running in the correct place at that point. So at that point that's pretty good. I'm just pulling these cords out so they're a bit more even so I can get a handle on them. Now on a Reflex 3 you can put a little screw through here which stops that cord from being able to fall off the drum. On the Reflex S you don't have that. But this is very frustrating keeping the cord in place. What you can do is use a couple of washers and a screw in this position and use that to clamp the cord. Get that screw started. You can decide for yourself what you want to do with the cord. I normally just take one side, take it over one side of the washer, take the other cord over the other side of the washer. Now providing I know which side I've run it down, just do that screw up very lightly. You don't want to cut the cord off. But that'll hold your cord in place at the top. So all the stuff from here to here is comparatively secure. That means we've only got to fight with getting the cord onto the drum here. I'm just checking to make sure I know which one is which. Okay, so this is the front cord, this is the rear cord. Now I can get this stuff up on the drum and get the drum in position. Now the cord at the front, on the front pulley, that goes to the bottom side of the pulley here, wraps around this way. We start with the front because it's easiest to get to the front. So I'll get the cord into the drum there, pull it through on one side and run the cord around that drum. Just taking up some of the slack. The other cord, the one in the rear position, that goes through the other slot in here, and the cord has to run around the drum in the opposite direction. Like that. Now get those cords back over the drum down here correctly. This is one of the most awkward businesses, getting these cords to run around correctly. That looks good. I'll stretch that out over its post there, and I need to check my cord run, make sure it's correct. I'll take that screw out now. I think we're done with that. Retrieve the washers. And having a look at my cord run there. Now I've got a twist in it at this point. I've got my cord swapped over here. So I've got to get these two swapped over so that this cord is at the back position, this one's at the front position, because at the moment they're in the wrong way. Is that right? No, I've still not got that right. That's how it needs to go. Running parallel, but I've got them running on the same pulley there. Yep, one of those cords has just shifted. Yep, now we're off up here. Okay, I've just got to check my cable run at the top. I'm still holding this in my finger and thumb on the other hand to make sure I haven't swapped this bottom to the front. That's correct. Okay, got my cable run correct now. I need to get my cable lengths round to the start position. Basically, the cord I've got coming in at the front here, I only want 3/4 of a turn on that. Let's roll this back. This meter's not fixed to that cord, it's just floating, so I can just slide that round a bit. At the end of that cord, Yeah, I was going the wrong way. That'll help. That's about it, and that's probably about the right start position too. Okay, so the meter cord is in place, and I just need to put the tension spring in position. This cord's got plenty of tension in it. It must be just the right length, or they must have allowed more slack than I did. I need to get this spring in position. Now there are 3 different methods used for tensioning these springs at the cord at different times. This is the most common, using a spring like that on a pivoting arm. One of them just uses a sliding arrangement, and you slide the pulley down and lock the screw up. It has no, but the spring allows a bit of compensation if you like. Okay. So that meter cord's in position, and that's part of the fight out of the way. Now, one of the joys of these meters is that if you knock that thing out of the way, and it's not hard to disconnect that, knock it loose from the camera, because particularly when the cord's holding it under tension. Of course, the cord comes off the drums, and if the cord comes off the drums, you're back at square one putting all your cord back again, so it's worth being fairly cautious to make sure that you don't disturb your meter. Alright, with that meter problem out of the way, we'll move on to the next part.